Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, of course, I thought that I would do a little video and I thought that I would talk about the Wimbledon champion, of course, Mr. Novak Djokovic, who I believe has now won his seventh Wimbledon title. And I do not know how many Wimbledon titles that is for him in a row, but I do believe that he has won it for at least, I believe, the past 4, maybe 5 years. If I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. But anyways, Mr. Novak Djokovic was able to beat the very talented, especially physically, the very great athlete, Mr. Nick Kyrgios, the Australian player, who Novak Djokovic actually has never defeated in any match before this match. But of course, Novak Djokovic, showing the resilience and also the greatness usually that he does show, he was able to beat that of Nick Kyrgios, I believe, within about 4 sets. And this was not going to be an easy task because this could have easily went to Nick Kyrgios if Nick Kyrgios, in my view, would have played maybe a little bit better. But I do think that Novak Djokovic said more than likely that his game plan was to volley with Mr. Nick Kyrgios as much as he could, try to probably tire him out within the first set. And if you did get another set over him, he was going to somewhat, I'm not going to say completely mentally crumble, but he was overall going to get a little bit rattled. He was overall going to get a little bit mentally unsettled. And the reason why I say that is because Nick Kyrgios is a very emotional person. He's a person that, of course, gets very over emotional on the court. He gets very angry. And listen, you're in a Grand Slam final. When it comes down to it, it's all understandable. But Nick Kyrgios, in my opinion, it's very clear that he has an emotional issue. He has a very big anger issue. If you have seen him overall play before, and I think Novak Djokovic's plan, basically with Mr. Nick Kyrgios, was basically overall what he does with a lot of players, which was even if you lose the first set because you knew that Nick Kyrgios was going to have a little bit of a serve advantage, especially in that of the first part of the game. But what Novak Djokovic, I believe, planned to do was basically try to volley him, break him down, tire out his legs, get him to miss, get him to doubt himself. Because if you get Nick Kyrgios to doubt himself, you can plant that seed in his mind overall that he is going to lose. And there has been a multitude of games in Mr. Nick Kyrgios' career where he has been very, very close to winning them, but he has lost overall because he had a seed of doubt in his mind. And once Nick Kyrgios overall starts messing up, it's very hard for him to come back and win that match. I've seen it several times, and that's exactly what happened in the final sets. So it just is what it is. But Novak Djokovic, I think overall that him losing the first set, I kind of predicted that. To be honest with you, I did not really know who was going to win this match. I believe that I predicted Novak Djokovic to win this match, but I thought that there was a very decent possibility that this match could have won debatably all 5 sets. So the fact that Novak Djokovic was actually able to outperform Mr. Nick Kyrgios in that of 4 sets, I do think is decently impressive. But Nick Kyrgios, if he is going to win a Grand Slam final later on, which is possible, and one thing I will say is this, he did look to improve a little bit and calm his nerves a little bit against Stefanos Tsitsipas, who of course is that of the Greek player. I believe that that is probably the best win of his career against one of the top 10 players, recently, or at least overall in a Grand Slam. So Nick Kyrgios could potentially be on his way, but in my view, Nick Kyrgios, he is going to have to play a little bit smarter. He is going to have to pace himself a little bit better, and he's also going to have to control over his emotions, especially in that of the big moments. Otherwise, he may just be another one of these guys that are very, very highly talented, but never win another grand or never win a Grand Slam final. Almost kind of like Russell Westbrook overall in that of the NBA. Russell Westbrook, when you take a look at Russell Westbrook, he looks so entirely talented. He's so athletic. He can jump out the gym. He can almost do anything, at least in certain regards. But he just does not have a high enough basketball IQ, and he's just not that smart on the court. He turns the ball over way too much. Overall, he does not know how to pace himself as well. And overall, you can somewhat get in his head. And it's kind of the same thing with Nick Kyrgios. But overall, for his first Grand Slam final, I thought that he made it very, very decently competitive. But once Novak Djokovic started to break his serve, the match was pretty much over. And the reason why I say that is because even though Nick Kyrgios is a very, very talented tennis player, in my opinion, all in all, Novak Djokovic, if you're going to beat him, you almost need to pretty much put him down and out, kind of like what a Rafael Nadal does against him in that of the French Open. Or overall, he needs to be on a very, very off day. And Novak Djokovic was not on an off day today. He pretty much was on his A game, And I think all in all that his game plan once again was to volley with Nick Kyrgios in the first part of the match. You may lose the first two sets even debatably. You might lose one of those sets, but as long as you get a decent volley with Nick Kyrgios, as long as he does not dominate the set, you can tire him out a little bit, maybe tire out his legs. And then on top of that, once he overall goes along the match, and if you're able to capture a set, he is going to start messing up. He is going to start doubting himself. And that's exactly what happened. And as soon as Novak Djokovic won the third set, I pretty much thought that the match was over, and that's exactly what ended up happening. But very good overall performance by Mr. Novak Djokovic. I thought that his game plan overall was very, very good. It certainly was much better than what I seen in his last Grand Slam performance against that of Rafael Nadal. I do not think that that was one of his better performances. And that's also another conversation. Because now Mr. Novak Djokovic now has 21 Grand Slam titles. Rafael Nadal, of course, now has 22. And there is many debates about who is that of the greater player. And usually when I take a look at players, or usually when I take a look at someone, I usually say that the person with more titles, at least debatably in my view, is that of the greater player. But with Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal, the differences are very, very marginal, at least when it comes to that of the Grand Slam titles. But almost every other category, I probably would have to give the advantage to Mr. Novak Djokovic. And the reason why that is because Novak Djokovic, in terms of being number one, and on top of that, when it comes down to it, not only has he been number one for a certain amount of years and days, I believe out of any other, more than any other male modern tennis player overall in history ever since the Slam era or the Open era. But on top of that, not only has he been number one for that amount of time, I believe that he either has won just as many titles or around the same amount of titles, possibly even more titles than that of Rafael Nadal. And he is a little bit younger than what Rafael Nadal is. And on top of that, when it comes down to it, if you have been looked at as the number one overall player, especially in that of the ATP rankings for such a long time, and on top of that, the difference is only a one Grand Slam difference. And let's be real a little bit here. A part of the reason why it is a one Grand Slam difference was because Novak Djokovic, in my opinion, was banned from the Australian Open at the last minute. I kind of thought something was a little bit rotten in Denmark about that, but it is what it is. But let me not overall try to degrade what Nadal overall is doing. I'm not trying to do that at all. All I'm saying is that if you were to ask me who I would pick between the two about who is the greater player, I personally would pick Mr. Novak Djokovic. Now, if you picked Rafael Nadal, I certainly would not have a problem with that. It's not like it isn't a debate. Of course, a lot of tennis fans, especially when it comes to Federer and Nadal fans, against that of Djokovic fans, they love to argue with each other a lot. I'm not a person that likes to get in a certain amount of the conflict of things. I just like to debate things and put my perspective out there. Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal, in my view, they are right there with each other. But the only way, in my view, that Rafael Nadal even stays in the same conversation with Novak Djokovic is if he ends up winning more titles. Because if Novak Djokovic ends up winning more titles than Rafael Nadal, or if they end up having the same amount of titles, it has to go to Mr. Novak Djokovic. There really is no other comparison. And the reason why that is because in almost every other category, Novak Djokovic has him beat. When you want to talk about the head-to-head record, even though it's very, very close, Novak Djokovic overall has him beat, I believe, by one. Now, of course, a lot of people may say, well, that's not that huge of a difference. No, it's not. But when you also factor into the point to where they've played more on clay than what they have hard court against each other or grass court, then overall it is a difference that does need to be counted. And the fact that Novak still has the lead in that category. When you also take into the category that Mr. Novak Djokovic, overall, that he has 7 Wimbledon titles now on a grass surface, and he also ends up having 9 fast court titles in the Australian Open and 3 titles in that of the U.S. Open, and also now 2 French Open titles in the era where Rafael Nadal ended up playing. Now, of course, one of those titles was when Rafael Nadal, I believe, ended up pulling out to injury. So if overall you wanted to mention that, you certainly could. But Rafael Nadal ended up winning overall, I believe, as well. Sometimes when either Novak Djokovic was injured, and now that he ended up getting banned. So you can kind of mention that for both of them. But in terms of statistics, in terms of being the number one all-around player in the rankings, in terms of titles, in terms of overall a certain amount of things, the complete game of both players, the head-to-head record, when you talk about all in all, who has the more well-balanced game, who in my opinion had the higher peak, who overall probably was the more dominant of the two, I would have to go with Mr. Novak Djokovic. it is very, very close. And had Rafael Nadal ended up winning this Wimbledon title, I probably would have had to acquiesce and say, you know what, Rafael Nadal, in my opinion, he now has, I'm not going to say a complete discernible lead over Novak Djokovic, but it would have been a lead. Because if Novak Djokovic would have lost to Rafael Nadal in the Wimbledon, then Rafael Nadal would have been able to tie up the record, and then he would have been able to beat him at the Wimbledon when Novak Djokovic was in one of the best years of his career. But Rafael Nadal, unfortunately for him, did not end up that way. Excuse me. But it is what it is. Anyways, we will see what potentially both gentlemen could do for that of the U.S. Open. It should be very, very interesting. Rafael Nadal, he may not even be able to play in that of the U.S. Open, and if you wanted to maybe factor that in as well, you certainly could. I'm sure if you're a Rafael Nadal fan that you would factor in, and we will see overall what ends up happening for that. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Mr. Novak Djokovic in that of the U.S. Open, because that has been the Grand Slam where, in my opinion, that he has usually underperformed the most. And the reason why that is, and some people may say, well, why would you not say the French Open? Because he's only won 2 of those, he's won 3. Because Novak Djokovic, in my view, what I mean by underperform is not performing really up to your par level. And Novak Djokovic, in my view, should have won more Grand Slams at the U.S. Open than what he has. And it seems like the pressure, even though Novak Djokovic, even though he usually does live up the pressure quite well in big game situations, it seems like the pressure overall at that of the U.S. Open seems to be almost a little bit too much for him at times in certain situations. I thought that he put on a very horrid performance last year against that of Daniel Medvedev. And of course, he ended up getting suspended, I believe, or he ended up overall getting disqualified in the tournament a couple of years ago for hitting a ref because, of overall the ball hitting the judge, I believe, and out of the throat, which was Mr. Novak Djokovic's fault. So Novak Djokovic, in my view, is going to be very interesting to see what he does at the U.S. Open this year, especially if Rafael Nadal is not there. So overall, it's going to be very interesting. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, congratulations to Mr. Novak Djokovic. I thought that it was a very well-played match. It probably was one of the better matches in his career, especially against a very greatly talented athlete like that of a Nick Kyrgios. Do I believe that Nick Kyrgios could eventually win Grand Slam titles? He certainly somewhat seems to be on the way. And if Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic, if they retire within these next few years, I'm not sure how old Kyrgios is, but I do believe that he's in his late 20s, if not late 20s and early 30s. He could potentially maybe win 1 to 3, maybe even more Grand Slam titles. Possibly if he smartens it up a little bit, and if he also realizes how to play cool and calm under pressure. But we'll see overall what happens. But anyways, very great performance by Mr. Novak Djokovic. That pretty much is about it for my analyzation. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will talk to you all later.